The first thing I noticed was her feet. Not her face, not the dress that hung off her like a grain sack on a fence post, not the way she stood at the edge of my camp, the way a deer stands at the edge of a clearing, ready to bolt, calculating distance. Her feet. The soles were cracked open, so deep the skin had split in dark lines, like drought-split earth. And where the leather moccasin had worn through on the left heel, I could see the raw pink underneath. She'd walked a long way on those feet, and she'd done it without shoes fit for the walking. I was sharpening a knife. My camp was 2 days' ride south of the Black Hills, a small fire. My horse staked to a cottonwood at the creek. Late September, the grass already going yellow and the cottonwood leaves beginning their turning, gold and trembling in that particular way they have, like they already know what's coming. She didn't speak, neither did I, for a while. I finished the draw of the blade across the stone, set the stone down, looked at her feet again, then up. She was young. Maybe 22, 23. It was hard to say, because hunger had sharpened her face down to angles, hollowed the cheeks, a darkness under her eyes that belonged on an older face. Her hair was brown, tangled from travel. Her hands, when she finally let them hang at her sides, instead of crossed over her chest like a shield, thin the way hands get thin when the rest of the body has been eating itself for a while. Wasichun, white woman, married, probably. There was a ring on her finger, plain band of silver, but she wore it like she'd forgotten it was there, or like she wanted to. I said, in English, "You are welcome to sit." She flinched. She hadn't expected English. "They never do," I said. "I won't hurt you." And then I went back to the knife, because sometimes you have to let a frightened thing decide for itself. She stood there another long minute. The fire crackled. My horse, this was old Shunka Wichasha, who I'd had 11 years, turned his head and looked at her with that mild, patient eye of his and then went back to the creek grass. Horses know, if they're not alarmed, it's a good sign. She sat down. Not close. She put the fire between us, which was smart. She sat on her heels, which told me her feet hurt too much to cross her legs. She was watching me with the particular watchfulness of someone who's learned to read the moment before a thing turns bad. Set the knife down in my lap, blade away from her. Let her see that. "When did you last eat?" I said. She opened her mouth, closed it, then, "Yesterday, I think. The day before, maybe." Her voice was careful, clipped. Not unkind, just stripped down to the minimum, the way people talk when they've been a long time, without being spoken to gently. I had dried buffalo in my pack in Pemmican, and a small pot of rendered fat, and there was a tin I'd been given by a trader in Laramie that held cornmeal. I'd been carrying that cornmeal 3 weeks, not sure why. Sometimes you carry a thing, and find out later why you were carrying it. Made her a meal. Plain cornmeal mush with fat and a strip of the dried buffalo laid across the top. Not much, because you don't give a starved body a large meal. The stomach has forgotten what to do with a large meal, and it will refuse it, painfully, and you'll have done more harm than good. I put the tin cup near some cider of the fire, and I went back to my side, and I looked at the fire, and not at. She ate, slowly. I could hear her trying to slow herself down, the way you fight the body's instinct to wolf what it's been denied. She managed it. She finished what was in the cup, and then she sat very still with the cup in her hands. "Thank you," she said. Quiet, like she'd needed to search for the words. "There's more if you want it. Later." "Not yet." She nodded. She understood. We sat like that a while. The fire, the cottonwoods, the creek moving in the dark. "What is your name?" I said. A pause long enough that I thought she might not answer. Then, "I am called Tonkanging Ska," I said. "My mother's people called me that. The traders call me White Elk." She looked at me then, really looked, for the first time, taking stock. I was 41 that autumn, big through the shoulders still, though I'd lost the fullness of a younger man. My hair was braided and wrapped, the way I'd worn it since my uncle taught me. The clothes were a mix. I'd stopped wearing that one way or the other a long time ago, dressed for what the weather and the work required. I watched her eyes move over my face, and I let her look. Let her make whatever calculation she needed to make. You speak very good English, she said. I had a missionary teacher when I was young, I said. And I spent 3 years at Fort Laramie when I was in my 20s. You hear enough of a language, it stays. She nodded slowly. Her hands were still wrapped around the empty tin cup. And she was doing the thing cold people do with a cup, even after it's empty, holding on to the memory of the warmth. Where are you going? I said. This was the question. I could feel her tighten around it even from across the fire. Away, she said. That's all. Just away. I'd been enough places in my life to understand that sometimes away is the whole destination. Away from a thing can be as real a direction as toward one. There's a settlement, I said. 3 days walk east, near the river. Church and maybe 20 houses. Good people, mostly. A woman there, a widow named Mabel Forsyth. She takes in women sometimes who need a place. Clara looked at the fire. 3 days, she said. On those feet, I said. Longer. She glanced down at her own feet, then back up. There was something behind her eyes. Not shame. Exactly. More like the particular tiredness of someone who has been ashamed so long that the shame itself has become just another weight they carry without thinking about it. Sleep, I said. I have a blanket. In the morning, eat more. Feet need binding before you walk anywhere. She looked at me a long time. Why? She said. And she meant it as a real question, not a challenge. Why would you do this? Why would you be this? She'd learned, somewhere along the way, to ask why before she trusted, because trusting without asking why had cost her. I thought about it. I said the true thing. Because someone should have before now, I said. And because I can. She slept on the far side of the fire wrapped in my best blanket, the one my mother had made, elk hide cured soft and painted in the old way along the edge. She slept the way deeply exhausted people sleep. Still, sudden, like a door closing. I sat up a while, and kept the fire and watched the dark and thought. I'd been in those hills 2 weeks, alone, which was not unusual for me. I was not married. I had been, once. My wife Changte Chihila had died of the spotted fever 8 years before, and we'd had no children, and after a while alone, you stop expecting the shape of your life to change. You stop expecting, and that is its own kind of peace. A cold kind, but it holds. My band was 2 days north. I'd been down here scouting. We'd had trouble with some cattlemen pushing their grazing lines east into our territory, and I'd wanted to see the land for myself before I brought the matter to the agent. I was supposed to be back in 4 days. I looked at Clara's feet, where they stuck out from the blanket. The soles, the splits in the skin. I have crossed a lot of hard country in my life. I know what feet look like that have been walked on past their limits. Those feet had been neglected for a long time. Not just today, not just this week. That kind of damage is weeks in the making, maybe months. Put another piece of wood on the fire, and settled my back against my saddle and watched the coals. In the morning she was awake before me. Surprised me. I opened my eyes and she was sitting up, the blanket around her shoulders, watching the dead fire with an expression I couldn't read. When she heard me move, she went careful and still again. That reflex, that particular flinch, I said. Good morning. And I meant it plain, and she let out a breath she'd been holding. Good morning, she said. I made a fire and heated water, made more of the cornmeal, this time with more fat and a handful of dried berries I had in my pack. She ate all of it. I had some pemmican myself, and we didn't talk much while we ate, which was fine. There's a kind of company in eating together that doesn't need words. After I said, show me your feet. She hesitated. I have cloth for binding, I said. If the wounds aren't wrapped, they'll go bad in another day of walking. She looked at my face for a moment, then she unwrapped the moccasins. The left heel was the worst. The split skin had started to bleed again in the night, and the area around it was reddened in a way I didn't like. Hot to the touch when I checked. Beginning of something worse if it was left alone. I had bear grease in my pack and dried yarrow, ground fine, the way my grandmother had taught me. I mixed it with a little of the grease on my palm, and I cleaned the wound first. That was the part that made her hand grip her own knee, white-knuckled, because it hurt, and she was trying not to make a sound about it. And then I packed the mixture into the worst of the splits, and I wrapped both feet with strips of cloth from a shirt I'd worn thin, the one I'd been meaning to cut up for rags anyway. My hands on her feet, the smallness of her feet in my hands. I don't know why I'm telling you that detail. Except that you remember the things you touch when you touch them with care. She didn't say anything while I worked. When I finished, she looked down at the wrapped feet, and then up at me. And there was something in her face that was close to tears but wasn't. Exactly. That place just before tears when you've held them back long enough that your face doesn't know what to do with an act of kindness. You didn't need to do that, she said. I know, I said. I started packing my things. She watched me. You're leaving, she said. Not accusation, just noting it. We're leaving, I said. I'll take you to the settlement. She went very quiet. Then, you said 3 days, on foot. My horse can carry us both. 2 days, maybe less. She looked at the horse, which was watching us both with that patient, mild attention. Then she looked at me. Your people, she said, won't they? I have time, I said. She hadn't been on a horse much. Challenge. I could tell by the way she held herself at first. Too stiff, fighting the horse's movement, instead of moving with it. I told her to let her hips go loose, to follow. Not resist, she tried. Slowly, over the first hour, she got it. Her body learned the rhythm. We rode south and east. She sat in front of me, the proper way for 2 on 1 horse, so the rider in back can control the animal without fighting the passenger. She was light, even for a woman her size. Too light. We didn't talk for a long time. The plains opened up around us, brown and gold. The sky, that particular October blue that has no color quite like it, deep and clear and cold at the edges. A hawk rising a thermal to the south. The dry grass making that sound it makes, like distant water. After a while she said, How long have you been in these hills? 2 weeks. Alone? Yes. She considered that. Aren't you lonely? The question surprised me. Not the question itself, but the directness of it. Most people don't ask that kind of question of someone they've known less than a day. Sometimes, I said. The honest answer. She nodded, slowly. I've been alone, she said. In a house full of people, that's worse. I thought about that. Yes, I said, I think it is. Another silence. Good one this time. Your wife? She said, eventually. Looking at the same spot on the horizon I was looking at. Asking the air between us, not demanding I answer. She died, I said, 8 years ago. I'm sorry. And your husband, I said. Is he the thing you're walking away from? A long pause, the horse's hooves on the dry earth. His mother, she said at last, mainly. That was all she said then. That wasn't enough for me to begin to understand the feat. The starved-down body. The watchfulness. The way she flinched at sudden sound. That first evening, we made camp near a dry creek bed where there was still enough shelter from the wind in the cottonwood break. I had enough food for 2 more days if we were careful, and I wasn't worried. I've gone hungry before. Hunger doesn't scare me. She helped with the fire. Didn't ask. Just started doing it, the way people do when they've decided to trust enough to be useful. She gathered the wood from the deadfall along the creek bank, and she laid it right. Small stuff first, then the bigger pieces. The way someone who spent time outdoors knows to do it. She was good at it. Efficient. She had some skill in her that the Marsh house hadn't used and hadn't valued, and so had pretended wasn't there. That told me something too. While I cooked, rabbit I'd taken in the late afternoon, a quick shot, the kind you get when the land is generous. She sat close to the fire, and I watched her without being obvious about it, the way you watch someone you're trying to understand. She was coming back into herself. Slowly, but you could see it. Like something that had been pressed flat by a great weight. Cautiously beginning to remember its own shape. She sat straighter than she had that morning. She looked at things with more interest. A crow landing in the cottonwoods. The color of the sky at the horizon. She'd been hungry, and now she wasn't, not completely, and the world had come back into focus around her. Tell me about her, I said while we ate. The mother-in-law. She looked at the fire. You don't want to hear that, I asked. She picked at the rabbit meat. Then she began. Her name was Ida Marsh, the mother-in-law, Hind, and she was a woman who had lived her whole life deciding who deserved what. And she decided early that Clara deserved nothing. Marriage. Clara hadn't chosen it. Not exactly. It had been arranged, her family needing the alliance with the Marsh money, and she'd told herself she could manage it. She'd told herself there were worse things. And for a while, she'd been right. Husband had been not unkind, just absent. He was away on business more than he was home, and when he was home, his mother was always there too. That was the thing. Ida lived in the same house, had always lived in the same house, and the house was hers in the way that matters, the invisible way. The food first. That was where Ida started. She controlled the kitchen. She told the cook what was prepared, and in what quantity, and she decided who was served, what amount, and Clara's amount was always less than everyone else's, and this was never spoken aloud, was never called what it was just the way things were. You're not hungry, Ida would say. You've been sitting all day. Or, that's enough for a woman your size. And the husband didn't see it or chose not to see it. Clara was still learning, which. And the servants understood it was not their place to say anything. And so Clara learned to eat what she was given and be quiet about the hunger the way she'd learned. To be quiet about everything else in that house. It went on 2 years like that. She got thinner, and Ida would comment on it, this thin little thing, and there'd be a note of satisfaction in it that Clara could hear, but couldn't prove. She got weaker, and there were spells. Twice she'd had to hold the wall coming down the stairs, and once she'd gone dizzy in the garden and woken up on the ground, with dirt on her cheek, and the gardener looking frightened, and Ida had said, with that voice, that she'd always been a delicate creature. Clara said this, without inflection, without self-pity, in the same stripped-down, careful voice she'd used the night before. She was describing something that had happened to someone who happened to be her. That quality in the telling told me more than the facts did. Your husband, I said. He came home 3 weeks ago, she said. For a month, he said. And I thought, maybe it would be different. She stopped. Started again. He saw me and he looked right at me and he said, you look well. And I realized then that he couldn't see it. Or he didn't want to. Either way. She looked at her hands in her lap. I left 2 nights after that. I took what I could carry and I left. I said nothing. There's nothing to say to a thing like that. You just hold the space for it. After a while she said, my feet were bad before I left. I was going to try to get to the next town, find someone, ask for help. I walked longer than I should have. A pause. And then I found your fire. Yes, I said. She looked at me. Direct then. Tired but clear. You didn't have to help me. I know. You keep saying that. Because it's the part that matters, I said. She slept easier the second night. Less like a door closing and more like someone choosing to rest. I stayed awake a while, again, with the fire and the dark in my own thoughts, which were, I won't pretend they were simple. I was thinking about things I hadn't thought about in a long time. The shape of my camp with someone in it. The different quality of quiet when it's 2 people quiet instead of 1. I was thinking about Chong Techihila. The way she used to wake before me and already have the fire going, and I'd open my eyes to that. Her back to me, working, and the feeling it gave me. That particular feeling of a man who has someone to come home to. Someone whose presence says, this place, this life has another person in it who has chosen it too. 8 years of not having that. And then a white woman with broken feet at my fire, eating my food, sleeping in my mother's blanket, and me sitting here thinking thoughts I had no business thinking. I put them away. Or I tried to. The second day we rode through country that opened up. The hills giving way to the longer plain. The sky expanding in that way it does when you get south of the uplift, like a curtain being drawn back. She was more relaxed on the horse now. Her hips loose, her back following my movement without thinking about it. Occasionally, I felt her weight shift against me, settling, and I said nothing about it. We talked more that day. About the land. She wanted to know the names of things, the grasses, the birds. She had a way of asking questions that suggested she'd been living a long time with no one willing to answer them. She stored the answers, you could tell, didn't let them slide by, held on to them. I told her about the Black Hills, about the way the hills look in winter, snow in the pines, the strange blue shadows. About the buffalo before the buffalo were mostly gone, when the plains were black with them in the migration and you could hear the ground shake 3 days before you could see them. She listened without trying to fill the silences. "Did you grow up there?" she said. "In the hills?" "My mother's band, yes. My father was a trader, a French trapper, mostly. He came through one winter and stayed one winter, and that was enough for what he intended." I said this without bitterness. It was simply the true account. My uncle raised me, my mother's brother. He was a good man. Where is he now? He died, I said. 6 winters passed. He was old. He died in his bed, which was not nothing for a man who'd lived as he lived. I paused. Carry things of his still. The way he braided his hair. A song he taught me. How to read weather. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a good kind of inheritance." I looked at the back of her head. Her hair had dried and loosened somewhat from the tangles of the previous days, and in the full sun, it had red in it that I hadn't seen before. I hadn't expected that answer from her. Most people say sorry when you tell them someone is dead. "Yes," I said. "It is. We stopped at midday to rest the horse and eat. I made a small fire, not for warmth, just for the kettle, for tea, which I had enough of for 2 cups. She held her cup in both hands and drank it slowly, and looked at the plain. And then she said, out of nowhere, "You going back to your band after this?" "Yes." "Do they know you're? Do you have someone to go back to? People?" "Yes. My cousin and her children. Some of the old men who were boys with me." I looked at the fire. "It's enough." She turned the cup in her hands. "Do you get lonely?" she said. Not the same question as yesterday, more specific, not asking about the hills. "Sometimes," I said. Same answer, also more specific this time. She nodded. She didn't look at me. She looked at the horizon, and whatever she saw there, or thought there, she kept, put out the fire, and rode on. We reached the settlement in the late afternoon of the second day. It announced itself first as a smell. Wood smoke, livestock, the particular human smell of a place where people are cooking and living, and then as a cluster of rooftops in a shallow valley, church spire, the glint of a well. I felt her go tense when she saw it. Not frightened, something else. Particular tension of arriving at a place after you've been running, when you don't yet know if the place will hold you. "Mabel Forsyth," I said. "House is the white one near the church, with the big porch. She'll be sitting on it if it's not too cold. Tell her White Elk sent you." Clara turned her head. I could see her profile. The sharpened planes of her face that were already beginning, with 2 days of eating, to soften slightly at the edges. A small change, but I could see it. "She'll know you," Clara said. "I helped her husband once," I said, "'fore he died. He was caught in bad weather north of here. I brought him home." "You seem to do that," she said. "Bring people home." I had no answer for that. I didn't look for one. We rode down into the valley. The people we passed watched us. A Lakota man and a white woman on one horse, coming into their settlement. They watched with that particular look of frontier people, taking stock, calculating, deciding. I've been looked at that way my whole life. It doesn't move me anymore. The White House was where I said it would be, and Mabel Forsyth was on the porch, where I expected. A big-boned woman in her 60s with gray hair, and a face that had been weathered honest. She saw us coming and stood. I stopped the horse at the fence. "Mabel," I said, "White Elk." She looked at Clara. Eyes moved over her the way a healer's eyes do, quick, assessing, reading what the body says before the mouth speaks. "Lord," she said quietly, inside. I helped Clara down from the horse. She was stiff. 2 days in the saddle after a long walk, and her body had spent all of its reserve. She stood on the wrapped feet, and for a moment her legs didn't quite have it. And I put my hand under her arm, steady, until they did. She looked at me then. We were very close for a moment. The horse between us and the fence, Mabel on the porch above, the late afternoon light going copper, across everything the way it does in October, hitting her face from the side, so that her eyes had more color in them than I'd yet seen. Green or gray-green, the kind of color that changes with the light. She put her hand on my arm, the one that was steadying her. She put it there, and she held it, and she looked at me with eyes that were tired and steady and clear. "You're a good man," she said. She said it plain. No drama in it. A fact she was stating because it was true, and she knew it was true, and she wanted me to know she knew. I have been called many things in my life. I have been called an obstacle, a problem, a relic, something to be moved around or managed or tolerated. I have been spoken about in the third person while I was standing there. I have been treated like I was half a man, because I was half each of two things, that each thought the other half lesser. I have never told anyone that those things hurt, because you don't, not if you're the kind of man I am. But she looked at me and said, "You are a good man," and she meant the whole of me. The braids, the land, the language she couldn't speak, the 8 years of alone, the bare grease onto her feet, the tin cup of cornmeal in the dark. All of it. She'd seen all of it, and this was her verdict. I had to look away for a moment, at the horse, at the fence post, at nothing in particular. "Go inside," I said. "Rest." She let go of my arm. She went to Mabel, who took her by both hands, and walked her up the porch steps with a firmness that said, "I have you now, you're here." I rode north, back the way we'd come, but faster. Just me and Shunka Wichasha, and the darkening plain, and the first stars appearing to the east. I rode for 2 hours before I stopped. Not for any practical reason. The horse was fine, the trail was good. There was still a little light. I stopped because I needed to stop. There's a sound the plain makes at that hour, in that season. A kind of held breath before the cold comes down. The day heat still rising from the earth. The night cool beginning above it. And the two meeting somewhere around your shoulders. A sound that isn't quite sound. More like a quality of the air. I sat in it. I thought about her hand on my arm. The weight of it. The plainness of what she'd said. I thought about Mabel Forsyth, who would feed her, and the women's settlement town who would find her work and a room and perhaps, eventually, a life that had her name on it. I thought about Clara, sitting on a porch like that, in a year, or 2 years, with color back in her face and her feet healed and her body her own again. I thought about the way she'd said, "You seem to do that. Bring people home," and I'd had no answer because the answer would have been, "I don't know what my home is now. I have a band. I have my uncle's braid. I have a horse in the hills. I have enough." But enough is not the same as full. I sat with that for a while, the plain and the dark and the stars coming in overhead one by one. Then I touched my heel to Shunka Wichasha's side and rode. I spent the winter in the hills, the way I usually did. Close to my cousin's family. Their lodge was warm and the children climbed on me. I did not object to, and my cousin Wichafi fed me too much the way she always did, insisting every visit that I'd gotten thin. Wasn't true, but was her way of saying she was glad I was back. Her 3 children were 10, 7, and 4. The youngest was a girl named Hanglacheyapi, who had decided early in her life that I was her personal property and would fall asleep against my arm in the evenings, and nobody thought this was a problem except occasionally my arm. I went to the council meetings and spoke about the cattlemen and the grazing lines and the treaty rights, and was heard, which was not always the case, but was that winter. I did the work of the season, hunted with the younger men, though I was past the age when I had anything to prove about it. Sat with the old men in the cold hours and heard the old stories, the ones that are told in winter, because winter is when you have time to remember who you are. The old men asked about my travels south. I told them about the cattle dispute, the grazing line, the agent at the settlement. They asked if I'd seen anything else worth noting. I said I'd come across a woman in bad condition, and helped her to a settlement. The old men nodded. One of them, Chongtongka, who was maybe 80, and had been 80 as long as I could remember, said, "You have always had a good eye for what needs doing." Then he went back to the pipe. That was the whole of it. But I thought about her. I won't pretend I didn't. Not every day, or if every day, not with the same weight. But she'd put herself in a place in my mind that she stayed in. Quiet, particular, the green-gray eyes in the copper light. The weight of her hand, the fact of what she'd said. The way she'd said it. Plain, like a statement of something she'd observed and was simply confirming. I've been told things in my life. I've been told I was useful, that I was capable, that I was formidable in a negotiation, that my English was good for a man like me. That last one always with the little pause. Before like me, that pause, that tells you what the rest of the sentence means. I've been told things about my worth, in the way people tell you things when they mean to define you by them. Clara had looked at me across that fence, thin, exhausted, standing on 2 wrapped feet in the mud, and said, "You are a good man," as if it were the simplest thing, as if it were the thing that needed saying, and she was saying it. I thought about starved people, about the particular cruelty of starving someone in a full house, which is not the cruelty of scarcity, but the cruelty of choice, of someone deciding, deliberately, that you are worth less than enough. And about what it does to a person, to be decided about that way for long enough. I'd watched it happen to my own people in different ways. The slow deciding that certain lives matter less, that certain hungers are not real, that certain people can be handed less and less until they forget they were ever meant to have more. The mechanism is always the same. You make the diminishment ordinary. You make the person doubt what they feel. You rely on their own good nature, their instinct not to make trouble, their hope that things will improve, to keep them from fighting what's being done to them. And then one day they look in a surface of still water or a window glass, and they don't quite recognize what's looking back. Clara had recognized enough, at some point, to put those broken feet on the road. I knew something about walking away from things that had diminished you. Not the same thing, not the same way, but I knew the shape of the decision. There is a particular kind of strength in it, not the flashy kind, not the kind anyone sees or names, the quiet, hard kind, the kind that looks like nothing from outside, and is everything from inside. I thought about that too over the winter, the way different kinds of strength recognize each other. In March, the moon of snow blindness, almost the moon of sore eyes, first real softening of the cold. I had business that took me south toward the settlement again. Cattle dispute, a formal matter. I was going to meet with the agent and 2 ranchers and try to hold the line on the grazing boundary. It took 3 days at the settlement, and the meeting went the way those meetings go, which is to say, we held some ground and lost some, and I came away knowing I'd have to come back in the summer and hold it again. On the last morning, I rode past Mabel Forsythe's house on the way north. Clara was on the porch. She was wearing a dress that fit her now. Not hers originally, but it fit the way a dress fits a woman who's come back to her own body. She was sitting on the step with a mug, and there was a book open on her knee, but she wasn't reading it. She was watching 2 sparrows argue over something in the mud below the porch. She looked up when she heard the horse. For a moment she just looked at me. Her face. I'd thought about her face a good deal over the winter, it turns out, and what I'd remembered was the starved version, the angles and the shadows. It had changed, not unrecognizably, still her. But fuller, softer, the color back, the shadows gone. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd been given time and food and rest and had used them. She stood up, the book down on the step. "White elk," she said. "Just that." "Clara," I said. The sparrows flew off. A dog barked somewhere on the settlement and was quiet. "Are you staying?" she said. "No," I said. "I have to be north by nightfall." She came down the porch steps. She walked carefully on those feet. I could see she still favored the left heel slightly. A small adjustment in her gait. Probably permanent, but she walked. She came to the fence. She put both hands on the fence post and looked up at me on the horse. In the morning, the evening light was different from the October afternoon light, but her eyes were the same, green-gray and clear. "I wrote you a letter," she said. "I gave it to Mabel because I didn't know where to send it." She said she didn't know where to send it either. "What did it say?" She looked at the fence post. A small smile, the first I'd seen from her, and it rearranged her face into something I wanted to keep looking at. "It said thank you," she said, properly. Not the way I said it before, when I didn't have when I couldn't. She stopped. Started over. "It said what you did was the most decent thing anyone had done for me in a very long time, and that I hoped you were well, and that if you were ever back this way, I hoped you'd stop." I looked at her hands on the fence post. Hands weren't thin anymore. They'd put their strength back. "I'm stopped," I said. She looked up. That small smile again, different now, but less careful, less held in. "Can you?" she started. "Then I know you have to go, I know, but can you just—" She stopped, then plainly, "Get down for a minute." I got down. I stood there on her side of the fence, in the mud of an early March morgen wasn't from, and she looked at me for a long moment with those eyes that had seen what I was, all of what I was, and found it good, and then she put her arms around me. Not the desperate grip of someone frightened, not a thanks that's really a prayer not to be abandoned, the deliberate, choosing embrace of a woman who had decided, had thought it through over a winter, in a house that was safe, with enough food and enough rest and enough distance to see clearly, and had decided freely. Her face against the side of my neck, hands on my back, her warmth against my chest. I put my arms around her, careful at first, then not careful, real, solid. The way you hold something that's real and that you don't want to mistake for less than it is. She smelled like wood smoke and something sweet, and the winter was finished, the cold was breaking, and the sparrows had come back to argue in the mud, and the dog was quiet, and the sky was that of spring pale blue that means the long dark is over. I went north as I said I would. I came back in May. The trip south had a stated reason. More business with the agent, a follow-up on the grazing agreement, a letter I was carrying from one of our council to a man in the settlement. These were real reasons. I'm not going to pretend they were the only ones. She was on Mabel's porch when I rode in, and this time she saw me coming from a distance. I watched her stand. I watched her shade her eyes against the May sun. I watched her recognize the horse and then me, and I saw, even from that distance, the change that moved through her body when she did. I tied the horse at the fence. She came down the steps. We stood on opposite sides of the fence post, like we had in March, except now it was warm, and the mud had dried, and there were new leaves on the cottonwood at the corner of Mabel's yard. "You came back," she said. I said I would. "You didn't say when." "May," I said. "Said I'd be back when the business brought me south." "You didn't say May." "No," I admitted. "Not exactly May." A pause. Then very quietly, she laughed. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh. A small sound, a little rusty, like something that hadn't been used in a while, and was surprised to find itself working. It made something loosen in my chest that I hadn't known was tight. "Come in," she said. "Mabel has coffee." I stayed 3 days that time. Not all at Mabel's. I had the actual business to conduct, 2 full days of it, the usual careful negotiating around a table, with men who would rather I wasn't there but needed what I knew. I did what I came to do. The evenings I spent on Mabel's porch. Clara had work by then. She'd taken on tutoring, 3 children in the settlement whose parents wanted them reading and doing sums. She was good at it, she said. The children were not difficult. She said it like she was a little surprised, like she'd expected everything to be difficult, and was finding that some things, without Ida Marsh in them, were simply not. I watched her when she talked. I watched her discover her own opinions. She'd say something, and then catch herself and look at me like she was checking whether it was all right to have said it. I held her gaze when she looked at me that way. Didn't say anything, just, "Yes, you can say that." You can have that thought. She was figuring out how to trust her own mind again after 2 years of being told it was wrong. I told her things too. About the council, the dispute, the particular weariness of watching treaties mean less and less while being expected to pretend they still mean something. I talked about it more than I'd talked about it to anyone, because she listened in the way that asks you to go further, not just nods but actually follows, asks the next question that shows she understood the last thing. Mabel Forsyth watched us from inside, through the kitchen window, when she thought I couldn't see. Old woman, sharp eyes, good heart, I'd have done the same. In May she was there, and in June, and by the time the summer burned down to autumn again, she was not waiting on Mabel's porch when I came south. She was meeting me a mile out, on the horse I'd helped Mabel's neighbor sell her for a fair price, which she rode now like someone who'd been doing it her whole life. I won't tell you everything. Some things are not for telling. I'll tell you this. There is a thing that happens to a man who has lived a long time in the cold kind of enough, the kind that holds but doesn't warm, and then finds himself, by a strange path, through hard country, in the company of a woman who sees him true and chooses to stay, who looks at all the parts of him, the braids and the English and the years alone, and the uncle's song and the country he comes from and the country he belongs to, and the in-between nature of a man like him, and says yes, this, you. That thing is not a small thing. Clara said to me once, we were camped in the hills. This was that second autumn, the aspens going yellow, the smoke of our fire going straight up in the still air. She said, I used to think being taken care of meant being diminished, that if someone did things for you, it was because you couldn't do them yourself, and it meant something small about you. I waited. I think now, she said, looking at the fire, that it depends on who does it and why. I think it was the why you did it. I asked her what she thought the why was. She thought for a moment. Then she looked at me across the fire. That direct look she'd been cultivating, the one that was hers now, belonged to her. Nobody had given it to her, and nobody could take it. Because I was worth it, she said. You saw that I was worth it, and you acted accordingly. I looked at the fire. The aspens moved in a small wind. The smoke bent slightly and straightened. Yes, I said. She nodded. She put her hand on my knee. I put mine over hers. That's the whole of it, as far as I can put it in words. A man who learned early to do without, to carry his own weight and expect no help with it, to stand in the in-between and find his footing there. And a woman who'd been slowly starved down to nothing in a full house. And a fire in the hills in September with the cottonwoods turning. I fed her when she had nothing, and she saw me. That's all. That's exactly enough.